Is Obama the worst president in modern times? I mean, with scandal after scandal, the IRS, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the horrible rollout of Obamacare, trading terrorists for one alleged deserter. I mean, the answer is pretty obvious, right? Well, according to a new poll out from Quinnipiac University that surveyed nearly 1,500 people, around a third of them say that obviously President Obama is the worst president since World War II. 33% of Americans polled say that Obama is the worst since World War II, and only 28% say George W. Bush was the worst president. Now, I'm going to get to that in a little bit of a minute here, but I wanted to share who most of the voters thought was the best president since World War II. Was it Bubba? Bill Clinton? Well, some might argue for him on his behalf. Was it John F. Kennedy? What about Nixon? No, it's definitely not Nixon. No. Who was it? A majority of Americans said that Ronald Reagan frickin' Reagan was the best president America's had since World War II. Isn't that amazing? Ronald Reagan. Now, it's no surprise to me why. Because the right, the Republicans, conservatives, they treat Ronald Reagan like a saint. Morning in America. Well, he obviously caused the Soviet Union to collapse because of his tough foreign policy, and he cut taxes for everyone. He took back our country from those crazy leftists like Richard Nixon. You know, because Nixon created the EPA, right? Crazy leftist. So pretty much all you hear about in the news is Ronald fucking Reagan.
It seems like everyone is invoking Ronald Reagan.
I worked with President Reagan.
My first vote for president was in 1980 for Ronald Reagan. I watched Reagan. I watched every speech that was on TV. I watched every press conference. And I just studied him, and I read every book that's ever been written about Reagan, and I just find the man fascinating.
What can President Obama learn from Reagan?
They idolize him. And look, personally, I'm sick of it. Reagan is essentially Republican Jesus. Despite the fact that he raised taxes 11 times, massively grew government. Now, check out this chart. Look at that. Look at that spending, especially compared to Obama, who's the, like, king socialist, right? Which is funny, king socialist. Doesn't make any sense, right? And look at that. 8 point, like, off the charts, almost. Ronald Reagan's first term. And his second term, a little bit better. And then look at Obama. And look at what Reagan did. He traded arms for hostages with Iran, funded Nicaraguan death squads, South America, gave amnesty to 3 million undocumented immigrants, supported an assault weapons ban. Yes, he pushed for an assault weapons ban, and argued for a market-based healthcare system. Sound familiar? If Ronald Reagan were alive right now, the right wing would call him an evil socialist tyrant. Best president since World War II. And Obama's the worst. Now, okay, so before you get after me about this in the comments, conservatives, I've got a few issues with Obama. And I think part of that 33% that think Obama is terrible are comprised of angry liberals like myself. We get kind of pissed off that he doesn't seem to understand that the right wing will never like him, will never work with him, even if he takes their ideas, and even if he gives them 99% of what they want. He'll still get criticized for holding out on that 1%. He could be exactly like Ronald Reagan policy-wise, and they'll still hate him because these people are absolutely irrational. They hate him because he's a black Democrat in the White House. Look, and one more thing. The problems that we have today that Obama is being criticized for are problems started under Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. Now, Clinton gets some of that blame too. I'm not leaving him out of it. His massive deregulation, bringing the Democrats over to the center, to center right. But look, according to conservatives, everything was just great until Obama was elected. And that's not reality. Now, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. Nick, Sean, what do you think about this poll, and what do you think about Reagan?
Well, let me jump in because Nick's Canadian, and this is an American poll near the birth of America, which is tomorrow, 4th of July.
Lies. 2nd of July.
Don't get involved with your facts in my story. So yeah, I think you're focusing too much on the Ronald Reagan aspect of it. Like, is Obama the worst president since World War II? Probably not. Like, it's probably George Bush or a guy who scored very high, Lyndon Johnson, who started the Vietnam War for no reason, which is very comparable to the Iraq War, probably worse in terms of lives lost. But I don't think, I think this is a case of the ghosts of presidents living on and becoming better. Like, people don't realize this, but during the 2000 election, Bill Clinton was asked not to publicly campaign for Al Gore because Bill Clinton was considered toxic at the end of his second term. Like, not as toxic as George Bush or Barack Obama, but he was still down with scandals. So basically, or not with scandals, but down in the approval ratings. Because basically, second-term presidents, everybody hates them. Like George Bush had the same issue when he was in his second term near the end, around this time. I would assume every other president doesn't score high when they're alive. Reagan didn't score high in the last term of in his last few years. It's just the way it is. And think about it like this: so many people hated John F. Kennedy that we don't know who shot him in the face, and he scored third on this list. So it's really an irrelevant poll. It's really about who you know more, or who's more recent. That's who you hate.
Okay. The last point Sean is dead right about. It's really about who you know, and that's indisputable. However, you started off bashing LBJ, so now I have to come and bring this back to reality. LBJ did not technically start the Vietnam War. The planning for the Vietnam War had been in place, well, for a long time under JFK. He's the one who at first escalated the troop quantities into upwards of 10,000, and had he still been alive, there's a very, very good chance he would have followed through with it anyway. LBJ was the kind of guy who's in a very tricky situation. He gets in, he doesn't really want to deal much with the Vietnam War. He wants to focus on his domestic social policy. He wants to craft the Civil Rights Bill. He wants to be that kind of president who focuses on that. At the same time, he's getting all sorts of pressure left and right about how to conduct the war. Should he stay in? Should he get more involved? Should they continue to prop up this government that they've been supporting since the 50s that really has no place in being there? Or should they let it bow to what will inevitably be a communist takeover of the country? It's the rock and the hard place situation for him. There's no good answer. No way he would have wound up being looked on favorably by anybody either way he went. So I'm much more lenient of what he did. However, the fact that Eisenhower didn't make second or first, that Reagan beat out Eisenhower, is amazing to me. Eisenhower, the guy who's by name recognition alone, if we're going by that, the supreme Allied commander who led the Allied forces to victory in the Second World War. By that, you'd think there'd still be some name recognition there that, he was present after, but he was still the guy who led us in the Second World War and stuff.
Well, no, well, here's the thing, too.
He was decent, too. He was not a bad president, so...
Well, here's the thing, too. People don't have that long of a memory. And Sean's point is exactly correct, right? His last point that he made, it's about who you know. And basically, and the good example that I brought up Reagan is because everybody talks about Reagan. Everyone talks about Reagan. Fox News doesn't shut up about Reagan. He's the conservative Jesus. Like I said, he's Republican Jesus. They bring him up just as many times as they bring up Jesus, literally. And so, yeah, of course, people are going to be like, I don't know, I heard Ronald Reagan was fucking awesome, so I'm just going to answer Ronald Reagan because apparently everyone thinks he's awesome.
I also got to jump in on this point because in true conservative fashion, they will even throw the Gipper under the bus. They're not afraid to do it. And frickin' Coulter did it a couple months ago, where she said we have to start moving away from Reagan. We have to stop being so devoted to Reagan. Reagan's not right enough. So if he doesn't fit their plan anymore, they're more than happy to get rid of him. It's just the fact that he's a president who presided over the collapse of the Berlin Wall that he gets any real sort of recognition. And he brought the American Navy too, but that's about it.
And the economy.
He also came up with the trickle-down theory, which everybody, like all the conservatives, are using, the supply-siders.
Well,
So, that's their go-to thing.
He didn't come up with it. Like, he's the guy who you could say helped implement it. But like,
Right.
Ronald Reagan ain't no economist. He was an actor. He didn't come up with nothing. But the thing I want to just to touch on the
he's credited with it. He's credited with it.
Just to touch on Lyndon Johnson, he staged the Gulf of Tonkin incident to go into Vietnam. So to me, that's the end of discussion on that guy. But
you're right about that fact. That marked the escalation into the Americanization of the war. You're dead right about the fact. However, the escalation had been going on well before LBJ got in office. But you're right, he did instigate the catalyst.
Regardless, I want to get back to the issue at hand.
Right.
Like, the fact that it's Obama's in office and we see Obama on TV, and like I'm sick. Like I got sick when I saw George Bush on TV over and over again, and like it's just you're at that point where you get sick of seeing this guy on TV. So you're like, who's the worst president? The guy in the White House right now. Like it's not a huge surprise. And what also helps is that George Bush has kind of gone away for 6 years. So like he hasn't been pissing people off. I'm sure if you asked who's the worst vice president since World War II, you would have two things happen. One, it would be Dick Cheney overwhelmingly, and number two, people would say would only be able to remember 3 vice presidents in their entire life. Like people don't care. But like that's the thing. It's just whoever's recent or really awful, and that's just how it is.